Let me tell you about the greatest wealth transfer you've never heard of. And I'm going to start with the names of the men who profited. Because when you follow the money backward from the winners, you see how the game was rigged from the beginning. Henry Morgenthau Jr., U.S. Treasury Secretary, the architect. J.P. Morgan and Company, the facilitators who charged fees on every forced liquidation. A consortium of American investors who bought American Viscose Corporation, Britain's largest U.S. asset, for $54 million when it was worth $125 million. Boeing, Lockheed, General Motors, Ford. Companies that billed the U.S. government, which then invoiced Britain with interest. These men and these institutions made fortunes between 1940 and 1946, not by conquering Britain, not by invading, but by doing something far more elegant. They bankrupted Britain, while Britain was saving the world from Hitler. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. Britain just finished paying them back. December 29th, 2006, final payment, $83 million, 61 years after the war ended. 3 generations of British taxpayers funded the richest wealth extraction in modern history. And most people think it was called helping an ally. Let me show you how they actually did it. September 1939. Britain declares war on Germany. At this moment, Britain is the wealthiest empire in human history. British investors own $22 billion in overseas assets. Railroads in Argentina, mines in Africa, plantations across Asia, oil fields in the Middle East. The pound sterling is the world's reserve currency. If you want to do international business, you do it in pounds. London holds more gold than any city except New York. Britain controls 24% of Earth's land surface through the empire. And the United States? Officially neutral, isolationist, staying out of Europe's problems. But neutral doesn't mean inactive. The US Congress passes something called Neutrality Acts. Sounds harmless, sounds like America minding its own business. Buried in these acts is a clause, cash and carry. If you're at war and you want American weapons, you pay cash. Up front, no credit, no loans. And you have to come pick them up yourself. Now here's what most historians miss. This wasn't designed to keep America neutral. It was designed to drain Britain's reserves before offering help. Because the people writing this policy knew something. Britain can't make enough tanks, planes, and ships to fight Germany alone. Britain will have to buy American. And if Britain has to pay cash for everything while fighting a war, Britain will go broke, fast. That's not a side effect. That's the plan. Let me show you how fast this works. September 1939. War begins. Britain starts buying American supplies, paying cash, gold bullion, sterling deposits converted to dollars. October 1939. Britain orders 400 aircraft from U.S. manufacturers, paid in full, cash. November 1939. Britain orders machine tools, steel, oil, cash. December 1939, British Treasury officials start doing the math. At this rate of spending, they have maybe 9 months of reserves left. January 1940, more orders, tanks, ammunition, raw materials, cash. February 1940, British officials quietly approach the Roosevelt administration. We're going to run out of money. Can we discuss credit terms? The answer is no. Cash and carry. That's the law. March 1940, British gold reserves are visibly shrinking. April 1940, Norway falls, Denmark falls. The war is accelerating. May 1940, France collapses. Britain is now alone. Orders from America triple. June 1940, Britain has spent $4.5 billion in 9 months. The Treasury calculates they have weeks left. And that's when they do something that still shocks me when I think about the scale of it. Operation Fish. Britain loads its entire gold reserve on warships, HMS Emerald and HMS Enterprise, and sends it across the submarine-infested Atlantic to Canada and the United States. We're talking about the physical wealth of an empire. Gold bars, securities, stock certificates, bonds. The largest movement of treasure in human history. Britain is shipping its financial sovereignty into exile to pay American bills. And the Americans? They're sitting in New York and Washington, watching the gold arrive, knowing exactly what this means. Britain is out of options. Now here's where it gets ugly. November 1940. Britain's gold is gone. The securities are being liquidated, but the war isn't slowing down. It's intensifying. Britain is still ordering supplies, still signing contracts, but there's no money left to pay. Winston Churchill writes to Franklin Roosevelt. The letter is famous. It's taught as a desperate plea for help. But read it like a banker, not a historian. Churchill isn't asking for charity. He's telling Roosevelt, "We're bankrupt. If you want us to keep fighting your war against Germany, you need to extend credit. Here are our remaining assets as collateral." Roosevelt takes this letter to his Treasury Secretary, Henry Morgenthau. And Morgenthau sees an opportunity that comes once in a century. A desperate empire, bottomless need, no alternatives. He tells Roosevelt, "We can help Britain, but first, they liquidate everything. Not most things, everything." Morgenthau demands a complete audit of British wealth, government assets, private assets, corporate holdings, investments, everything British citizens own in the United States. The British negotiators are horrified. Sir Frederick Phillips, Britain's top financial representative in Washington, tries to explain, "We've already given you our gold. Forcing us to sell long-term investments during a war will mean fire sale prices. We'll get 50 cents on the dollar. This will cripple us after the war." Morgenthau's response is a masterclass in leverage. If Britain still has assets, why should American taxpayers fund the war? Sell everything. Then we'll talk about aid. Now think about the power dynamic here. London is being bombed, U-boats are sinking food shipments, the British Army is rationing ammunition, and America is saying, "Prove you're destitute first." This is financial predation disguised as alliance. Morgenthau needs a visible kill, something dramatic to show Congress that Britain is truly bankrupt. He finds it. American Viscose Corporation. American Viscose is the largest rayon manufacturer in the United States. It's worth $125 million. It's owned by Courtaulds, a British textile company. American Viscose generates $10 million a year in profits. That's $10 million flowing from America to Britain annually. Morgenthau tells the British, "Sell it, now. Deposit the money in the US Treasury as a down payment for weapons." The British beg him to reconsider. This isn't some speculative investment. This is a productive, profitable company. Selling it under duress will be a catastrophe. Morgenthau gives them an ultimatum. Sell American Viscose by March, or I kill Lend-Lease in Congress. March 15, 1941. The British government uses emergency war powers to seize American Viscose from Courtaulds. It's a forced sale, no negotiation with the owners. Now here's the crime. The sale is handled by a consortium of American banks and investors. J.P. Morgan structures the deal. They know Britain is desperate. They know Britain has no leverage. American Viscose sells for $54.4 million. $54 million for an asset worth $125 million. The buyers just made $70 million instantly for doing nothing except having cash when Britain had none. And who were these buyers? That information was never fully disclosed, but we know J.P. Morgan was involved. We know the consortium included American industrial investors. These men bought a crown jewel asset at half price and walked away with generational wealth. That's not a transaction, that's a heist. But American Viscose was just the beginning. Once Morgenthau proved Britain would sell under pressure, the liquidation accelerated. Over the next year, Britain is forced to sell $1.1 billion in American securities. Stocks in American companies, bonds, investment portfolios that British families had built over generations. These aren't government assets, these are private holdings, pensions, savings, investments. The British government confiscates them under emergency powers and sells them to pay American bills. The sales are handled by American investment banks who take fees on every transaction. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, they're facilitating the liquidation and profiting from every forced sale. By mid-1941, Britain has liquidated over $1 billion in American assets. In today's money, that's $22 billion in forced sales. And only after this liquidation is complete does Morgenthau say, "Okay, now we can talk about Lend-Lease." March 11th, 1941. The Lend-Lease Act passes Congress. Roosevelt gives a speech. He uses a folksy metaphor about lending a garden hose to a neighbor whose house is on fire. You don't charge him for the hose, you lend it. He returns it when the fire's out. It's a beautiful story. It's also a lie. Because Lend-Lease isn't a loan of equipment, it's a lease. The name tells you everything. Britain is leasing American weapons, with interest, with conditions, with a reckoning at the end. The total? $31 billion over 4 years. But here's what the garden hose metaphor doesn't mention. The hose is manufactured by Boeing, Lockheed, General Motors, Ford. These companies bill the US government at cost plus pricing, meaning cost plus guaranteed profit. The US government then invoices Britain. So American companies make guaranteed profits. The US government gets repaid with interest, and Britain gets the bill. Let me show you how this worked with one example. Boeing builds B-17 bombers. Each one costs around $240,000 to produce. Boeing bills the US government $240,000 plus a guaranteed profit margin, let's say 10%, so $264,000. The US government pays Boeing $264,000, then the US government invoices Britain for $264,000 plus administrative fees. Britain owes $264,000 plus interest. Boeing made a profit, the US government made money, and Britain went deeper into debt. Now multiply that by every tank, plane, ship, gun, and bullet. This isn't aid, it's vendor financing, with Britain as the captive customer. And here's the part that still amazes me. While Britain is converting every factory to war production, American factories are making weapons and consumer goods. Britain stops exporting. British companies abandon markets in South America, Asia, Africa. Who fills those markets? American companies. So Britain is fighting Germany, bankrupting itself, and losing its export markets all at the same time. By 1944, the wealth transfer is complete. 2/3 of the world's gold is in Fort Knox. The dollar is replacing the pound as the global reserve currency. American companies dominate world markets, and Britain owes Washington $31 billion. But the real destruction hasn't even started yet. August 15, 1945, Japan surrenders. The war is over. 7 days later, Harry Truman signs an executive order. Lend-Lease terminated. Immediately. American ships in the middle of the Atlantic carrying food and supplies to Britain are ordered to turn around. No warning, no transition. The aid stops. Now think about what this means. Britain has spent 6 years converting every factory to war production. There are no civilian goods being made. Britain is importing half its food, all of its oil, most of its raw materials, all paid for with Lend-Lease, and Truman just turned off the tap. Britain has weeks before it runs out of food. John Maynard Keynes, the greatest economist of the 20th century, calculates that Britain is facing what he calls a financial Dunkirk. Without aid, Britain will default. Starvation is inevitable. There's only one option: beg for a loan. September 15, 1945. Keynes travels to Washington. He's 62 years old, dying from heart disease. He's going to negotiate a loan to save Britain from starvation. Keynes believes he has a moral argument. Britain fought for 2 years while America stayed neutral. Britain bankrupted itself defending Western civilization. Therefore, America owes Britain a grant, a gift, not a loan. He calls it justice. The Americans laugh at him. Fred Vinson, leading the negotiations, makes it clear. The war is over. Congress won't give Britain a penny. If you want money, it's a loan, commercial terms. Keynes is forced to negotiate. The Americans offer $3.75 billion at 2% interest. But there's a condition: sterling convertibility. Within 1 year, Britain must make the pound fully convertible to dollars. Keynes knows this is a death sentence. During the war, Britain forced its colonies to accept pounds, but blocked them from converting to dollars. This trapped wealth in the sterling system. If Britain makes the pound convertible, every country holding sterling will immediately dump it for dollars, because American goods are better and everyone wants dollars. Keynes fights this condition until he literally collapses from exhaustion. But Britain has no choice. The agreement is signed in July 1946. Keynes dies in April 1946. Heart failure. The stress killed him. July 15, 1947. As required by the loan agreement, Britain makes the pound convertible. The result is instant catastrophe. In 1 month, countries holding sterling dump 700 million pounds. Britain loses a quarter of the loan in 5 weeks. The hemorrhage is so severe that on August 20th, just 5 weeks later, Britain suspends convertibility. But the damage is done. Britain burned through nearly $1 billion for nothing. The empire is finished. Not militarily, financially. The 1946 loan wasn't forgiven. It was a commercial debt. 2% interest, annual payments. Britain paid every year. Through the 1950s, through the 1960s, through Thatcher, through Blair. The final payment? December 29, 2006. $83 million. 61 years after the war ended. 3 generations of British taxpayers paid for the privilege of surviving Hitler. Let me show you the scorecard. Morgenthau orchestrated the greatest asset transfer in history. Retired wealthy, no consequences. American banks made hundreds of millions in fees on forced liquidations. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all profited. American investors bought British assets at 50 cents on the dollar. Generational wealth. American defense contractors made billions. Guaranteed profits, no risk. The U.S. became the global superpower, controlled 2/3 of world gold. Dollar became reserve currency. Military bases worldwide. And Britain? Britain defeated Hitler. Britain saved Europe. Britain went bankrupt and paid America for 61 years. This wasn't unique to Britain. After World War II, the same playbook was used on Germany, Japan, South Korea. Marshall Plan aid came with conditions: open markets, U.S. military bases, alignment with Washington. Every American ally became economically dependent. Japan still can't pursue independent foreign policy. Germany still hosts U.S. bases. South Korea still answers to Washington. The pattern is always the same: crisis, dependency, extraction. This is how empires are built in the modern age. Not through conquest, through debt. When your ally is desperate, that's when you set the terms. When the bombs are falling, that's when you extract concessions. When survival is at stake, that's when you take everything. Britain wasn't saved by America. Britain was bought by America. The men who structured the deals, Morgenthau, the bankers, the investors, they knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't charity. It was the greatest leveraged buyout in history. And Britain is still paying. Not in money anymore, but in dependency, in military alignment, in economic subordination. The special relationship isn't between equals. It's between buyer and seller. If this showed you how power really works, subscribe to Modern Money Truths, because the same system that bankrupted Britain is running right now. The dollar is reserve currency, treasury bonds as debt traps, military bases as control mechanisms. The players change, the game doesn't.